Hi, everyone. I'm Fung-Lin, and it's great to be here at Deploy. Um, I actually used to work at DigitalOcean, so I'm extremely happy to be invited to speak regarding growth strategies for startups. I'd love to just start by giving you guys a brief introduction about myself. So I've actually spent the last 12 years of my career in marketing. In fact, marketing is the only career I've ever had. I started my career doing market research for Progressive Insurance. I did that for about 5 years, and after that, I went to business school and decided to make a switch and pivot into startups. So in the last 5 years, I've actually been in. I was in tech startups. I've worked for companies such as Datadog, Managed by Q, and DigitalOcean. Um, three successful startups that have all led to some sort of exit, whether it was an IPO or acquisition. At those startups, I primarily focused on building out different marketing functions for the company. So at Datadog, I was responsible for building out their entire marketing operations and analytics function. At Managed by Q, I built out their demand gen strategy, which included paid ads, events, etc. And then most recently at DigitalOcean, I actually ran their lifecycle team. Currently, I'm actually at MongoDB. I serve as the director of retention marketing at Mongo. At MongoDB, my role was actually very focused on running our product-led growth strategy in terms of how do we engage with our users, how do we onboard them, and most importantly, how do we retain them so that their lifetime value can grow with us. So for today's session, again, I do want to focus a little bit more on the SaaS business. I'm hoping most of you here are in the SaaS, or most of you are in the SaaS business. Given that my last 5 to 7 years of my career has been in SaaS, it is a space that I know very well about. And I really wanted to share some of the learnings and insights that I've had in the last 5 years in terms of what I've seen work when it comes to building out a very successful growth strategy for your company. This talk will be focused a lot on just different how you think through your strategies, what metrics you should monitor. But then I'm really hoping if you're a founder or you're trying to build out a marketing team, if you're a CMO, hoping this is a talk that would be great for you. The last thing I would say is I am keeping an eye on all the questions that are coming in. So as you have questions throughout my talk, feel free to pop it into the Q&A. I'll try to answer them as I go, but if not, I'll try to answer them towards the end. Otherwise, you can join me at Discord and we can definitely chat there more there too. So let's get started. For today's agenda, we have 30 minutes. Hopefully this session will just run very quickly for you guys. But what I really want to highlight is one, let's talk about marketing growth strategy. Like, why is it such an important topic? Why does it matter for you and your company? And then after that, I really want to just give 3 of my top strategies. When I think through building different marketing functions, there's always 3 strategies that I always go back to that I feel like is very important to just nail down. And then after that, everyone talks about this, especially if you're in marketing, if you're in growth, you have to have certain metrics to monitor. Obviously, the metrics you monitor will vary based on your industry, the type of product you're in, but I'll try to highlight some of the main metrics that I think through when I'm trying to hold marketing teams accountable. And then we'll end this session with key takeaways. Just what did we talk about today? What can you really take away from this? If there's anything you need to remember, these are what you need to remember. So let's definitely get started. So why is marketing growth strategy so important? As everyone knows, marketing is very costly, right? When you first you think of an idea and you have your business and you start your startup, usually the first thing you put your dollars in isn't going to be on marketing. And the reason you don't immediately hire a marketing team is because marketing is very costly. In order for marketing to run well, you do need to invest more money into it, right? Like whether or not you want events, ads, those cost money in order to acquire customers. So the way I think about why having a marketing growth strategy is so important is you need to make sure that every dollar you're investing into marketing will give you some sort of ROI back into your business, right? I think in the past, when I first started my marketing career, marketing was seen as this big brand campaign where you pour money out and then people didn't know how to get the money back. But nowadays, marketing actually has proven that it can be a very profitable function if you invest the right dollars in and if you invest the right people. And because marketing can become such an important money generating or way for you to acquire customers, it's very crucial that as you are just building out a marketing strategy, that you know exactly what type of strategy you need. And if you know exactly what strategy you need, you can hire the right people, you can hire the right talent, and most importantly, you can develop the right KPIs so that the marketing teams know exactly what the strategies and the tactics should be in order to help go to market and in order to help scale the business. So in my last 7 years of my career, all the marketing functions I've been at is actually it's always been we've always been held accountable to certain metrics, and our goal is always if I spend $1 of the company's money, I better bring back more than $1 in revenue. And that was something I've always been in, is like in revenue marketing and trying to figure out how marketing can become so a profitable function. So let's get right down to it, into how should you then think about your strategy. I'm going to break this down into 3 strategies just to keep it a little simple for the sake of time. The first one is, in SaaS business nowadays, I think there's this really popular idea of there's 3 different types of marketing strategy, or even what we consider growth strategy, that you can go down. You can have your marketing can be they can be a sales-led strategy, it can be a marketing-led strategy, and finally, it can be a product-led strategy. Product-led is probably the newest one of the 3, and it's become quite popular. I would say in SaaS companies, a lot of companies are now going through to a product-led strategy. But let's talk about just each of the 3. I do want to start by saying, don't think of it as a company, you don't have to choose. You don't have to only choose one of the 3 strategies to implement. In fact, almost all the companies I've been at, although most startups I've been working at are a little more in a mature stage, they've always implemented either all 3 strategies or 2 of the strategies, etc. However, what I think is important is, if you are a younger strategy, you should think about starting with one. Or if you're a younger startup, you should think about starting with one strategy. And the way you think about which strategy works for you is, you really have to think what drives revenue to your business. By the time you're ready to build out a marketing team, you probably already have enough data to know what is generating revenue for the company. And you already have a little information and insight into what attracts users into your product or to pay for your product. And that can help you understand which marketing strategy to go down first. So let's talk about the first one. Sales-led. So when I think about sales-led, it's a little more intuitive, right? If you are a sales-led driven company, essentially your customers tend to be more executives. It's more of a top level, top down strategy. The goal of marketing is actually to help drive leads to support the sales pipeline. So think of your most, I actually think there's a lot, like if you think about Microsoft or Marketo, right? The way, if any of you use any type of marketing automation tool, the way they catch you is you click on an ad in Marketo and you give out, or you download a white paper by Marketo. You give out your information, and the next thing you know, a sales rep is reaching out to you. They send you 3 or 5 emails, they get you on a demo, and that's how they close their deal, right? Sales is what's actually generating the revenue. They go after decision makers, not end users, but decision makers. And usually there's a longer sales cycle, right? Because you go from seeing a marketing ad all the way down to talking to a salesperson, you negotiate on a contract, etc. So that's what I think of sales-led. And if your company tends to go after decision makers and that's who needs to sign off, sales-led might be the right strategy. And in that form, the marketing's role is really to figure out how to find the most qualified leads to help sales build their pipeline and generate revenue. The second one is marketing-led. So marketing-led is where it's your revenue growth is actually generated by the consumption of marketing content. So it's a little similar to sales-led, but the way I think of it is Drift is actually one of the examples that always comes to my mind. Drift was a very, very known for their marketing strategy, and HubSpot is too. HubSpot made inbound marketing very famous, right? They wrote a ton of articles, organic. They wrote a ton of articles, blogs, docs, tutorials, and it was exactly those docs and tutorials that got people interested in HubSpot. And their marketing team was actually what was generating revenue. And it's extremely focused on acquisition, right? They're very focused on top of the funnel. I would say HubSpot is your best example in this case of what made marketing-led popular, because by consuming content, marketing content specifically, it was a selling piece for users, and it was what made users or prospects likely to convert to customers. And then finally, product-led growth is probably the most famous one today. So in product-led growth, what's interesting is you're actually relying on product usage to acquire customers, onboard customers, and retain your customers. Essentially, the idea is you believe your product can sell itself. But marketing is responsible for providing resources to help onboard users so that to solve a certain pain point. So in a product-led growth, and Slack is a very good example of this. If you think about the way Slack works, right? Anyone can download Slack, anyone can use Slack. But the reason Slack grew so fast is because once you use a product, in order for you to get value out of that product, you have to invite more people, because you're not, maybe some people will, but you're not going to chat with yourself and you're not going to Slack yourself, right? So in a product-led growth strategy, the product sells itself and it almost becomes its own referrals engine. Sometimes people will actually call product-led self-service, because in a product-led growth strategy, your product you're actually selling directly to the end user. Even if it's a B2B product, you're actually advertising it to the end users. And the end users are using the product, they hit a aha moment, and that's when they start to realize that the value of they start to use a product, hit the aha moment, realize the value of the product, and they will naturally start to refer people. And it becomes this loop that people go through. So I would say in a SaaS business nowadays, product-led is a very, very strong strategy to go after. It's something that everyone feels I think it's a very smart strategy. And it's actually what I've been focused on in the last 2-3 years of my career, is how to help companies roll out a product-led strategy and how to make it successful. When you think about a product-led strategy, the role that marketing team plays, again, is you're actually more of a supportive function, right? But you're trying to support your product. And you need to stay very closely to the product team, because in order for you to stay close, you need to stay closely to a product team so that you can then help you can help them figure out how to onboard users as quickly as possible. So I know I have 2 questions that came in, and I kind of want to address them really quick. The first one is, what's more important in the first days? As a SaaS in the first days of existence, what's more important, growth or retention? I will say when you're starting marketing, you need to focus on the growth first before you can think about retention. Ultimately, the way I think of it is there is no one to retain if you don't acquire enough customers, right? So I think for every company, most companies I know, the first strategy is let's acquire as many companies. Let's bring as many users into the door as possible. Once we get a lot of users into the door, we can start tracking their usage, see their behavior, and identify if retention is even an issue. For some companies, retention might not be an issue. And if that's the case, you can kind of hold off on focusing on retention. So unless churn and retention is an issue for you, the marketing traditionally should try to focus on acquiring users, getting users to register for your product, getting users to know about your product, getting that brand out there, helping users onboard so they can engage with your product soon. So that's kind of how I would think about it. Another question I do want to talk about when developing a question that came up when developing a SaaS company, which of the strategies should be followed? Sales-led, marketing-led, or product-led? This is where it really depends on, we'll talk a little bit more about this after this slide, but think about the way you sell your product. One, does it take a long time for you to educate users on your product? If it does take a long time to educate, sales-led might be the right strategy, right? Because you have a longer sales cycle and you need someone to actively demo a user. If you think that your product is very intuitive and using it is what generates revenue, a value, product-led then is the right way to go. So I would just think of it from that end. We can talk more, like whoever has a question, I'm happy to talk more about it, like how you should think through what strategy you should go first. But if I think about a lot of companies, whether or not I was at Datadog as my first startup, and they definitely have both a sales-led and a product-led strategy, right? They have a sales team that goes after big decision makers, big enterprises, but then they also have a self-serve product where they allow developers to just register for the product, try it out for themselves, and then they use that. They have that bottoms-up strategy as a selling method. Before I go on to the other slides, I do want to say when we dive deeper into metrics, this topic or this session will be a little bit more focused on product-led, just because I do think in a SaaS world, product-led it's becoming more and more important to just know about product-led growth and how you should maybe eventually think about building out some sort of product-led strategy. So the second strategy I would highly recommend is developing a consistent messaging. This is crucial for any marketing team, right? It's the reason why a lot of people will choose to hire a content marketer or a product marketer as their first marketing hire. And the reason you need it is because when you are marketing, whether or not you choose sales-led, marketing-led, product-led as your main strategy, you need to know exactly how you plan to message users. So one, do you know what your product is solving? Is it a new product that's disruptive in the market that requires a lot of education? Or is it an existing problem that users realize that they have, right? Is it a problem people realize they're having, or is it a problem that people don't realize they have and you need to educate them on that problem? So you really have to tone down on what your value proposition is as a company. What is this product solving? And when you can figure that out, you also then need to think about what's the best way to educate people on my product? Is it a free trial, a freemium, or demo? And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But do people require a demo in order to understand what your product is solving? Or do you need to give them full access, right? In like a free trial, right? Do you need to give them like full access to your product for 20, 30 days in order for them to understand how to most benefit from your product? Or do you need a freemium model where you just need to incentivize people to register, and then as they start to use it, you believe they're going to start paying you for additional features because that's how they'll get value out of it. The second one is then you need to know your users inside out. I don't think I've been at any company that doesn't do surveys and user interviews. When I was at DigitalOcean, we actually had a very, very big, we had a UX team who I thought was really good at really understanding our users. And they developed a lot of research on the developer persona. What is the pain point of our users? Even at MongoDB, we do this where we will interview customers, but we'll actually watch them as they get started on our product. And we'll look at where they're having trouble when they're onboarding our users, our product. We'll look at what pain point our product is solving, because sometimes the pain point you think you're solving is totally different than what most users are actually using your product for. So you need to know both what your product can do for them, but then you also need to know it from their perspective, right? You need to know how my users are using my product. What do they really think about it? Why are they leaving my product? Why do they stay? Why do they stay? Why are they paying for these features? What is a challenge? What is the challenge they're trying to solve? And then finally, it is the role of the marketing team to make sure that once you understand the messaging and the value proposition of your product, it's so important for the marketing team to make sure that that messaging is aligned across all teams and all channels. Just because marketing wrote out a boilerplate, you need to make sure that your sales team is saying the same thing. You need to make sure that your product is saying the same thing, right? You need to make sure that whether it's the product team, the sales team, the marketing team, the solutions engineer, everyone is aligned on this value proposition and this boilerplate so that it is very clear what your product is and what it's doing. And the reason you need to be consistent is because the second you acquire a customer, they're in their mind, they have a certain perception of what your product is doing. And you need to make sure that is consistent throughout. The last thing is to look at your user journey and look at the data. This is probably one of the biggest things that I think a lot of companies don't do early on. Once you have a product and you start to have customers, you have to build out your customer journey. And your customer journey is not just spend marketing dollars, they come to an event, they become a customer. You have to get as granular as possible. So this is a very simple example, but someone sees an ad, they click on a landing page. What do they do what does the landing page tend to tell them to do, right? You create an account, they activate, once they activate, you try to get them to invite a user, they create a group, they upgrade, they refer. Think about Slack as kind of like that, right? Like once you open a Slack account, you activate your account and you start to invite users. And then you start to create all these Slack channels. And because of all these Slack channels and you want to retain your data, you then upgrade to an enterprise product. And then because of your experience on Slack, you start to spread the word and you start to refer people to it. And the reason you need this customer journey and the reason you need to make it that very, very granular, every single step that users take in order to become a customer is because that's how you determine your main metrics. That's how you identify what is a conversion rate at each stage and where are your conversions dropping off. And you want to know where you're dropping off because if you really want marketing to be a profitable business, you have to start optimizing at every stage of the funnel. And to know which stage of the funnel you start at, this is what you need to do. It's built a very customer journey. So now let's talk about metrics. And this ties in perfectly. So that example I just gave from seeing an ad all the way to referral, right? You can think of it as marketing is generating awareness, and eventually someone is advocating your product. And knowing the conversion of every single step is so important. So on the left side of the slide, you'll see some of the metrics that I think through about each one, right? When you're generating awareness, you're looking at cost per click, cost per acquisition. Once someone clicks an ad and they create an account, what you care about is what is the registration rate? How many people that see my ad then register for an account? Then there's activation rate. Activation rate definition can vary quite a bit for different companies, but for activation rate, you're just thinking about what percent of my users are then entering a credit card account, entering a credit card information, or what percent of them is deploying a cluster, etc. Then there's free to paid conversions, retention rate. We won't go through each one in detail, but what I want everyone to take home is when you build out your customer journey, that's what helps you define what metrics you can monitor, because at every stage of the funnel, right, you have a metric that you need to look at. And if you notice a metric that's extremely, extremely low compared to industry standard, you know that's where your marketing team needs to focus on first. So if your registration rate is, say industry standard for registration rate is 2 or 3%, and your registration rate is 0.02%, right? You know that's where you're having a hard time. So you need to figure out how you can get from a landing page to create an account and optimize that channel. And that's exactly how you can help your marketing team to prioritize their work. So I just mentioned this, but essentially you need to compare to industry standards. When you're comparing to industry standards, there's a few things that you need to keep in mind. Make sure you're comparing it to similar industries. Make sure you're comparing a B2B to a B2C company, right? If you're a B2B, compare it to a B2B company. And also keep in mind of your business models. If you have a freemium versus a free trial, your industry standard is going to be different, right? So for the best example is in a freemium model where you give users limited access to features, usually the free to pay conversion is like in the 5 to 7%, right? Because you are essentially opening up your entire top of funnel. In a freemium model, you are giving everyone, a lot of people will register, but not a lot of them will convert to paid because they're just taking advantage of, some people just only want those free features and they're happy with that. Like Evernote, for example, like I use Evernote and I don't pay for it. But there are going to be use cases where people will pay for it. And then you have free trial, which is you give people full access to all features within a limited period of time. So what that happens is usually your conversion rate is much, much higher, right? So their free to pay conversion rate usually is around the 15%. And the reason is because you are letting people experience the entire product, but then you believe that that will essentially lead them to paying for your product when the trial expires. So that's just something to think through when you're looking at like, how do you figure out which metric to start with? I know this session went by really fast. I really want to just end with some quick key takeaways, and then I want to look through and go through some questions if I can. Let's just kind of summarize today's talk. 1, make sure you identify the main strategy or the first strategy that your company wants to play in so that your marketing team can know what role to play. Are you a sales-led, marketing-led, or product-led company? And that will help dictate marketing's priority. 2, know your product inside out, interview your customers, really understand your customers and your product, because that will help you not only with the product development, but it will also help a lot with messaging and getting users to setting their expectations. So when they onboard, they're going to retain with you. 3rd, build out your customer journey. Make sure your customer journey is as granular as possible. And once it's as granular as possible, you can start to work with the data team and identify all of those drop-offs, identify those conversion rates, see where the areas of opportunities are, and that's how the marketing team can start to prioritize. And then last thing is identify the key metrics so you can prioritize work. I just mentioned this, but essentially figure out the main 1 to 3 key metrics where you see the biggest area of opportunity. And that should be the marketing's goal for the next quarter, the next year. And once that number improves, let's focus on another key metric, and let's focus on how to optimize that. And the last thing, which I didn't really talk about today, but don't stop learning. I feel like marketing strategies are changing all the time. So it is so important for you to make sure that you stay on top of what's new, what's upcoming, what's working for different companies. I personally join a ton of Slack communities. I'm in a lot of Slack communities where I hear from other marketers about what works and what doesn't work for their company. I attend webinars, I attend events, I read a lot of marketing books. And I also even have like an advisor that helps me when I am building out functions. Like I do work with an advisor and I do try to speak with experts in different fields that's similar industry, but I do speak with other people who are much smarter than I am to just see if I'm missing anything. So that's it for the talk. I will join the Discord. I would be at the Discord after this talk. So if anyone wants to join me after the session, feel free. I'll try to see if I can answer more questions. We have 1 minute. I do really want to talk about a few things. What is a low cost effective marketing strategy for startup? Totally varies on company. For a lot of companies, maybe organic traffic is what works, right? Because you can invest in people to write up blogs and content and optimize for your SEO. And then that is like a free traffic that can come in. Usually I would say content is like a slightly more low cost marketing strategy. I know we're at time, so I really want to thank everyone for coming today. I didn't get to all the questions and I feel terrible, but join me in Discord and then let's talk. I'll try to answer all the rest of the questions there. Thank you guys so much for having me. This is a blast and I hope everyone enjoyed the session. So thank you.